Welcome back to Operation Evil. This is episode 128, and this is special because we have Mandy on as a guest again. Thanks for coming back on. But Megan's idea was like, hey, Mandy, do you want to do the case? Like, do you want to tell us? Basically, how did you put it, Megan? We're going to be the guests on our own show.
Yes.
So we don't even know like what case she's really covering. This is so exciting. I'm so excited. So yeah, I don't know. Mandy, I'll just let you, unless if Megan, you have anything to say.
Nope. Just glad to have you back, Mandy.
Oh my gosh, I'm excited to be back. But you guys didn't even tell me like you guys were going to be the guest on your own show. You were just like, "Hey, do you want to do a full
Hmm.
episode?" And I was like, "Oh my God, yes."
Well, I love how passionate you were last time, and then like you have all these ideas, so it's like perfect for you to like just do whatever case you wanted to do.
Yeah, I felt like I owed you for the last one. So we'll get into it, and I think you'll love this one. You guys buckled in.
I am
Yes.
buckled in. You're the first one to do this, by the way. You're the very first guest to actually like do the story. That isn't like a
Oh,
personal story. You know what I mean? Like to actually, yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there.
I'm honored. I'm
Take
just
us away.
I'm glad you guys weren't terrified to invite me back.
Not at
A
all.
wild card. All right, so this is episode 128, and it is titled Today is the First Day of the Rest of Your Life.
Ooh, that's a
So,
good one.
oh, I figured you guys would like that one.
Mm-hmm.
So, for everybody listening, if you remember episodes 119 and 120, I joined Megan to cover the case of the quote unquote doomsday mom, Lori Vallow, and her partner, Chad Daybell. If you haven't heard the episodes, I highly recommend going back and listening. They were pretty intense. Megan did an amazing job of breaking down the timeline and explaining everything. So at that time, I intended to explore and dig into the cult related angles of Lori's story. After all, a lot of people believe she was forming or even trying to lead a cult. But when we really looked at it and we got into it, there just wasn't enough evidence. She didn't meet the standard markers of a cult, and there was really no concrete proof she had built a cult-like movement. But today's story, however, checks those boxes and then some. So this episode, I can see
I
Naoko's
know, I'm
sitting
so
here like
excited. I'm like
dancing.
doing a little dance. I'm like, I love cults.
Yeah, you guys can't see her, but she's doing a little wiggle dance. This one is dedicated to Nyoka, and it comes by recommendation from my brother Will.
I
And like I
will.
said, I will. It's titled Today is the First Day of the Rest of Your Life. So the story begins in 1958 when Charles Chuck Diedrich, a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, founded the Tender Loving Care Club in Santa Monica, California. Initially, he envisioned it as a progressive drug rehabilitation program, and it was remarkably ahead of its time, especially heading into the 1960s when drug addiction was becoming a public crisis. At the time, many in AA did not accept individuals addicted to substances other than alcohol. Inspired by his own sobriety and a personal experience with LSD, Diedrich decided to create a program tailored to addicts' unique needs. He is even credited with coming up with the now famous phrase, "Today is the first day of the rest of your life." As the program gained traction, it evolved into what became known as the Synanon Foundation. Did I mention he was inspired by his own sobriety in a personal LSD trip?
No.
Do
All
we?
I can think of right now is when you say this is the first day of the whatever you said, the whole little tagline there reminds me of something from like Tales of the Crypt, like something that would open up an episode of that. That's all I'm envisioning right now.
Oh my gosh. I'm not gonna do it, but I can totally do that laugh.
Do it.
But I can know because Naomi will keep in the episode, and I'm not doing that. I don't
She
trust
knows
her.
me already.
That'll be
Yeah.
the opening audio.
I no, just the best part about this is he formed a rehabilitation program modeled after his own sobriety on a personal LSD trip. It's perfect.
The way to do it.
Yeah. All right. So, what started as a mutual aid residential treatment community quickly transformed. Synanon grew into an alternative society with radical practices and eventually into what historians described as one of the most dangerous and violent cults in American history. Members were later convicted of crimes ranging from financial fraud and evidence tampering to terrorism and attempted murder. And right here, I have a link for you to insert a clip.
My dad, Chuck's story, and Synanon's story. It's a big, beautiful, tragic story.
The judge praised his early Synanon work. He then concluded that he was sorry the program had degenerated.
What happened? It was terrible. Yeah, it's terrible. People suffered. People were hurt. And he did bring Synanon down around him. But all of us in Synanon, he couldn't have done it without us enabling him.
The foundation of Synanon's treatment model was peer support. Diederik rejected traditional therapy in favor of addicts helping one another. Admission into the community was rigorous. It required to sever contact with quit drugs cold turkey and during withdrawal upon arrival. So for those out there who don't know, drug and alcohol withdrawal can be excruciatingly painful. And depending on the type of substance and the history of use, withdrawals can have significant health concerns and even a high chance of causing death. So as a former corrections officer, I have seen many, many inmates withdraw, and without medical care, I can tell you it's not a walk in the park. It's pretty awful. But anyway, side quest over. Synanon's structure included a 3-stage residency model. Stage 1, members performed labor and housekeeping within the community, pretty typical of like what you would see in a halfway house. Stage 2, members worked outside but continued to live in the facility. Again, same thing, pretty typical. And stage 3, members lived and worked independently but still attended regular meetings. Pretty normal. Rules included prohibitions against drugs, alcohol, and destructive behavior, along with mandatory participation in group therapy. But Synanon's form of therapy, dubbed the Synanon game, was far from conventional. So let's pause there and dig a little bit into my forte, which if you haven't listened before, my forte is forensic psychology, and I focus more on the antisocial personality disorders. So what is attack therapy, you ask? Thank you for asking. First and foremost, I'm not a clinician. I'm still just a doctoral student, so nothing I say should be interpreted as recommendations or therapeutic advice at all. So if you're struggling, please seek help from a licensed, qualified clinician. With that said, attack therapy is a real thing, and it's deeply controversial and described in the book Crazy Therapies. It is a pseudo-therapeutical method involving highly confrontational group sessions. These interactions often involve verbal abuse, shouting, humiliation, emotional takedowns, or denouncement. The goal is to break down a person's defenses to force self-awareness and accountability. In Synanon, this took the form of emotionally aggressive group games that initially drew many desperate for support, but was soon escalated beyond anything ethical or safe. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not about like having people just like yell at me and put me down and be mean. Like that's not gonna make me feel any better.
I just keep envisioning Hunger Games.
Really? I'm thinking of Fight Club.
Oh, Fight Club. Yeah.
Fight Club is much cooler.
Yeah.
I'd be okay with a Fight Club.
Yeah. That's what I'm picturing.
Yeah. But yeah, so the National Alliance on Mental Illness also calls this form of treatment psychological abuse. And when coupled with love bombing post facto, it's manipulation and very commonly used to make a partner subservient and remain in a cycle of abuse. Megan, I know you've talked about that quite a few times on many other episodes. So I know as soon as I read that, that immediately clicked with you.
Yep.
Yep. So by 1959, Synanon had outgrown its small little storefront that it started in and moved into a beachside armory.
Mandy,
And yeah,
can I stop you for a second? Can you explain, we're in the 50s, almost 60s at this point in time. Our mental health care at this point in time, was anything? Was anything established at this time? Were we still using LSD to cure mental illness?
oh man. So in the 50s, I believe we were on the DSM-3, the Diagnostic
Okay.
and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, the DSM-3. Um, and looking that far back, that ju just for comparison, the DSM-3 said that homosexuality was a mental health disorder. So if that says
Right.
anything, the DSM-3 now is at like 800, or the DSM-5 is now at like 800 pages with I don't even know how many disorders now, when at the time I think it was 70 pages.
Right.
Oh,
So
Yeah,
I just want the listeners to understand that when we talk about mental health in the 50s and 60s, it is not the same as the mental health care that we have now. That's still inadequate, by the way. Thank you for that
yeah.
clarification.
Oh yeah. Back in the 50s and 60s, it was mental health was almost not even noticed. But you got to think that was back during the Vietnam War too.
Right.
We had soldiers coming back with what they were trying to explain as shell shock, which we now know very, very clearly is post-traumatic stress disorder that we are still struggling to adequately treat and understand.
Right.
So yeah, that gives you a little bit of perspective on it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so by 1959, Synanon had outgrown its small storefront, moved into a beachside armory, and in 1967, they purchased Club Casa del Mar in Santa Monica as headquarters. When locals protested, Diedrich was arrested for operating without a health license. In a calculated move, he chose jail time over compliance and shutting down the facility, drawing national attention and sympathy. The resulting public support was so strong that California Governor Edmund Brown signed legislation exempting Synanon from health licensing laws. Donations started flooding in. Even U.S. Senator Thomas Dodd praised the group, calling it one of the most dynamic and vital programs he had ever experienced. Synanon gained support from professionals and celebrities like Daniel Casriel, who lived in the community, Leonard Nimoy, who taught drama classes, and George Lucas.
Wow.
Yeah. Robert Altman hired Synanon members as extras in films. By 1964, Synanon began defying more and more than just health laws. They built illegal structures, operated without permits, and created a private trash dump and airstrip. The Connecticut Supreme Court ultimately ruled that their facility violated zoning laws, dismissing their claim that 30 members living together constituted as a single family. Megan knows about zoning laws.
I know all about that. I was just like, this is my wheelhouse, man.
Yep.
Megan's like, yeah, that's my jam, zoning laws.
That's illegal. Gotta put a stop work order on that one.
By the 1960s, Synanon no longer allowed members to graduate. Diedrich had become convinced that without the constant pressure and support of the community, relapse was inevitable. To keep distractions from rehabilitation limited, couples were separated, children were raised communally in a nursery called the Hatchery, and teenagers labeled as delinquents were sent to the Malibu re-education camp, where they were known as the Punk Squad. To evade further zoning restrictions and tax issues, Synanon declared itself a religion in 1974. I see Megan losing her mind.
Look at that. Smart. He's like, we'll just
It
be a
is smart.
religion. Yeah.
Because then they're untouchable at that point in
Yes,
time.
they are.
Exactly. So they became the Church of Synanon. The IRS granted them nonprofit status, and the organization shifted its focus from addiction treatment to utopian living.
In 74.
Yeah, 74,
Okay.
1974.
All right.
Yep. At its peak, Synanon was worth $33 million and was the largest property owner in Santa Monica. They owned 10 airplanes, 22 boats, and more than 500 motor vehicles, a chain of gas stations, an airstrip, a mortgage company, a major producer of commercial advertising, sales, promotion specialties, and several other businesses, as well as vast real estate holdings, mostly in California. Like, why?
Because they're tax exempt.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh,
It's
you
just
know
a
what? Why
write-off.
not?
Yeah.
Why not? I'm sorry. Now I'm giggling.
I mean, it's clever. This is why there's no loopholes anymore, right? Because everybody thought of it.
Yeah, exactly. Despite growing concerns, mainstream society continued to praise the group for its innovative approach to addiction treatment and juvenile reform. Diedrich envisioned a movement that could change society from within. He dreamed of social revolution. Synanon even developed its own schools designed for members' children, led by individuals like Altman, who believed in revolutionary education techniques and preached radical new philosophies. Wealthy and influential families sent their children to be educated there. For 2 decades, Synanon was seen as a groundbreaking movement with thousands of supposed success stories, a national reputation, a movement that promised hope. In the walls, the cracks were always there, and behind those walls, the therapy grew more oppressive, the control became total, and control became violent. This recovery community evolved into something darker. The game continued to become more like torture, turning into 72-hour versions, and was admitted by Diedrich to be brainwashing. It had been used for years to pressure people to submit to his will and reflected his increasing authoritarian control. The Wire was a full-time radio station that played recorded Synanon games, reaches, other learning tools. They had special telephones with dials taken off. The only control was loud and off, meaning they couldn't call out. They couldn't call anyone. Whenever there was a big shot game, it was played on the Wire. They even had a closed television channel where the game was filmed and played on the air. Nothing was secret or sacred. Everything was public, and people not at the game could watch or listen to the gaming. Diedrich would make everything public.
Do you
Synanon
explain the games? Do you explain any, like, did you have any information on any specific game? Are you getting to that?
Oh, no, it is called The Game. I had mentioned it in the beginning. The game is attack therapy, and they called it The Game.
So
That's
it's
where
not,
you referred Hunger Games and I said Fight Club, right?
Yeah.
yeah, but it's not a different game every time. It's just this. It's just the psychosis that they're causing.
Yeah, the attack therapy that they get together in those groups, they call it The Game.
And then what did you call it? There was another name like the Big Shots or whatever.
The big shot is they're the higher ups in the group, the more popular people, the more well-known,
Got
more
it.
important people, and they call them the big shots.
Got it. Okay, I'm
So,
tracking. I'm tracking.
yeah, so if Diedrich and one of his top were to that therapy or that quote unquote game, that would be a big shot game.
Got it. Okay, tracking.
Yeah. I know that's kind of confusing. That's why I really didn't really go into the reaches because that gets a little confusing too, but it's basically the same thing.
Okay.
Synanon continued to introduce more and more controversial practices and stricter rules on its members, including dieting, exercise programs, group marriages, shaved heads, which is why George Lucas hired them as extras. He needed a bunch of people with shaved heads. Yeah. Forced vasectomies, abortions, and exchanging mates. Approximately 200 couples changed partners and 230 couples got divorced.
There's your utopian for you.
Yeah. While Synanon initially did not tolerate violence, Diedrich came to allow for violence as he sought greater control over the group. Much of the violence by Synanon was carried out by an internal group called the Imperial Marines. Over 80 violent acts were committed, including mass beatings that hospitalized teenagers and ranchers who were beaten in front of their families.
Jesus.
People who left Synanon risked physical violence for being a splittee. One ex-member, Phil Ritter, was beaten so severely that his skull was fractured, and he subsequently fell into a coma with near-fatal case of bacterial meningitis.
Ugh.
Members were trained in Sendo, which is a type of martial arts, with the elite placed into the Imperial Marines, who were trained to commit violence against their enemies, and thus started to lead to a decline in membership and public scrutiny. Organizers soon found that Synanon's hallmark methods, including participation in the game, had little effect on the punk squad teens who, unlike willing adult participants, had not consented to the treatment or rehabilitation. Therefore, violence escalated for compliance and began to be a hallmark feature of Synanon at large. Legal problems continued despite the change. Children who had been assigned to Synanon began running away, and an underground railroad had been created in the area that sought to help them return to their parents. Alvin Gambonini, I hope I pronounced that correctly, a neighboring rancher to Synanon's Point Reyes facility, shot many who had made retaliation called beat Gambonini in front of his family. Members were brainwashed, mentally tortured, and barred from leaving. Those who escaped were physically attacked if recaptured. In 1977, former member Phil Ritter was nearly beaten to death when his skull was fractured trying to free his child from the cult. Beatings of Synanon opponents and its ex-members occurred across California. Beatings occurred in Synanon basements. A state grand jury in Marin County issued a scathing report in 1978 that attacked Synanon for the very strong evidence of its child abuse and for the monetary profits that flowed directly to Diedrich. The grand jury reported also rebuked the governmental authorities involved for their lack of oversight, and although it stopped shortly of directly interceding in the Synanon situation. By 1977, Paul Morantz, an American attorney and investigative journalist, warned government authorities Diedrich was mandating violence against, or a reign of terror, against Synanon enemies who were filing lawsuits on behalf of ex-members and victims. Morantz was well known for taking legal cases alleging brainwashing by cults and self-help groups and for sexual misconduct by psychotherapists. In 1978, NBC Nightly News produced a segment on the controversies surrounding Synanon. Following that broadcast, several NBC executives, including the network's chairman, allegedly received hundreds of threats from Synanon supporters. On October 10th of that year, 2 Synanon members placed a de-rattled rattlesnake in the mailbox of Morantz for the successful case brought against Synanon. The snake bit Morantz, and he was hospitalized for 6 days. This incident, along with the press coverage, prompted a law enforcement investigation into Synanon. So just in case you guys were wondering, they took off the rattler from the rattlesnake. That way he couldn't hear the rattlesnake.
I kind of figured as much. And I'm honestly surprised that the police took that as a threat and didn't say like it got in there. You know what I mean? Though, like I could see them just be like, how do we know that didn't just climb in there?
Hey, you know we love the cops. I'm military police, but cops in the 70s,
Yeah.
oh, it just crawled in there itself. We don't know. That's kind of how things went back then, and especially the LAPD. They didn't have a great reputation back then.
No.
So at this point, they're operating for a while because we're almost in the 80s.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, quite a while. 6 weeks after the snake attack, the LAPD performed a search of the ranch in Badger that found a recorded speech by Diedrich in which he said, trigger warning here, it's pretty rough, so if you don't want to hear anything that's pretty gruesome, skip this right here. All right, he said, "We're not going to mess with the old time, turn the other cheek religious postures. Our religious posture is, don't mess with us. You can get killed dead, literally dead. These are real threats," he stated. "They're draining lifeblood from us and expecting us to play by their silly little rules. We will make the rules. I see nothing frightening about it. I'm quite willing to break some lawyer's legs and next break his wife's legs and threaten to cut their child's arm off. This is the end of that, lawyer. That is a very satisfactory, humane way of transmitting information. I really do want an ear and a glass of alcohol on my desk."
Wow.
Was he the one that would go out and actually commit these things, though? Like, was he the one that actually placed the rattled snake in the mailbox? You know what I'm saying? Or
No,
did
of
he have
course not, Charles Manson.
exactly? Got it. Okay, I'm tracking.
Yeah, of course not. He's not gonna get his hands dirty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I figured.
Good
Though
question.
many yeah, because most of them don't.
Mm-mm.
Though many San Francisco area newspapers and broadcasters covered this Synanon case, they were largely silenced by legal action from some lawyers who made claims of libel. These lawsuits ultimately turned out to be a large part of Synanon's undoing by giving journalists access to Synanon's own internal documents. The main thorn in the cult's side was the Point Reyes Light, a weekly newspaper published by David V. Mitchell. The paper prevailed on press freedom and protection issues, and it reportedly was consummately professional. It won a $100,000 judgment against the cult, and in 1979, for its efforts, became the smallest paper ever to win a Pulitzer Prize. As a result of the snake attack, Diedrich and two Synanon residents, Joe Musico and Lance Kenton, were arrested and pleaded no contact to charges of assault and conspiracy to commit murder. Lance Kenton was sentenced to a year in prison, while his associates went to jail. Diedrich received probation because his doctors claimed that due to ill health, he would most likely die in prison. As a condition of probation, he was disallowed from taking part in managing Synanon. Diedrich died on February 28, 1997, at age 83 after a series of strokes. The cause of death was cardiovascular failure. Synanon struggled to survive without its leader, and with a severely tarnished reputation, the IRS revoked the organization's tax-exempt status and ordered them to pay $17 million in back taxes.
Ooh,
This
ouch.
bankrupted, yeah, 17 million. But honestly, it probably should have been more
Mm-hmm.
because they were estimated to be worth 33 million at one point. That's not over the entire 20 years. So this bankrupted Synanon, which formally dissolved in 1991. So we went from 1958 to 1991.
Oh my
Wow.
God.
Yeah. And I hadn't heard anything about this till my brother mentioned it to me.
Good
I've
job,
never
Will.
heard about it either.
So let's dig into the nitty gritty and let's get into my forte, the forensic psychology part. And let's talk a bit about the cult aspect of Synanon. Who says they're a cult? Why are they a cult? How are they classified? So first, it's important to note that all groups with unusual beliefs or practices are not cults. The key distinction lies in the use of coercive tactics and degree of control exerted over members by the leader or the group. Additionally, the term cult has a strong negative connotation and is often used in a pejorative way. I had mentioned this in episode 119 and 120 when we talked about the LDS community and how people often misidentify it by mainstream standards and try to say that they're a cult when they're really not. So that just kind of explains it again. The FBI does not have a single precise definition of a cult that they use for all investigations. Their website mentions that while they may investigate groups that some consider cults, the FBI's primary focus is on groups that engage in criminal activities such as violence, fraud, or thefts. However, key characteristics associated with cults are charismatic leadership. They have a leader who holds excessive power and influence over members. Isolation and control. Members are often isolated from family and friends or are subjected to strict rules and regulations. Members are exploited, whether it be financially or emotionally. Deceptive practices. Members may be misled or manipulated into joining or staying in the group. Potential for violence. Members may engage in or threats against others. On the very extreme end of the spectrum, the FBI may also consider the cult or their group as violent true believers, VTBs. They are those committed to an ideology or belief system that advances the killing of their self or other legitimate means furthering a particular goal. They are convinced that their truth is absolute and that no acceptable alternative exists. Synanon didn't really go quite that far. That's kind of something more along the lines of like Waco, if you guys know the story of Waco.
Mm-hmm.
Law enforcement officials and others who have investigated the organization say they have been struck by the number of similarities between Synanon and another cult that is more mainstream called the People's Temple. That organization was led by the late Jim Jones. Although they stress that there was some major differences, Synanon did race philosophy, as did People's Temple. They noted the following similarities. In both organizations, drug addicts were many of the first members. Both organizations promised members a utopian community and employed communal living techniques. De-emphasizing materialism and playing on its members' guilts, both used stern authoritarian leadership, hard labor, long meetings, and frequently frank and bitter criticism and ridicule of its members to keep adherent loyalties. Both split families and stockpiled arms. Both grew rapidly behind the enthusiastic support of political liberals. In both organization, rigid pursuit of nonviolence, and replaced by increasing paranoia over outside criticism and defection, and both sought to intimidate the press. Pretty identical on both sides. They both had charismatic leaders. One was called the Father, the other was called the Founder. Both tried to operate in a sealed world away from everyone else. One was in Guyana, the other was in Marin County, California, where Synanon's largest facilities were located. Both believed the outside world was conspiring against them. Both had specially trained security forces, and both favored the use of corporal punishment. Both have their own private communication systems. However, when it comes to singular VTBs or singular cult leaders, just as all individuals who ascribe to certain beliefs have their own personalities and unique backgrounds, all do not fit a particular mold. Psychologists have long known that all people are both the same and different. One scientific method, referred to as classification or typology, helps to address this reality by sorting individuals into subgroups based upon certain shared characteristics, while also emphasizing the differences among each group. By placing these leaders and individuals into certain groups, further communication can understand their leadership style and how they built their empire, for a lack of better word. By gathering the information, it creates a database for profile, like a model or a blueprint to predict the next up-and-coming leader, just like how we profile criminal actions, just how we profile like psychopaths, all the popular shows like Dexter and Criminal Minds and all that. They do the same thing with cults. So this next part, I have another clip again where it starts with a clip of Diedrich explaining himself as a leader.
Okay.
I'm Big Brother, I'm Big Daddy, I'm all kinds of things. I wore a wonderful costume for a good many years. I look more like Buddha than Gandhi. We are an experimental society. I don't know how this is going to come out. I really don't. If I knew how it was going to come out, I would do it.
So next we're going to talk about Diedrich as a leader. From all accounts, everyone loved Diedrich, or Chuck as they called him. He could make friends with anybody of any personality. He could talk to people in a way that could motivate them to do anything and make them believe they could accomplish it.
How scary is that?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what they said about Ted Bundy, too.
Mm-hmm.
The only difference with Ted Bundy, though, is that they said Ted Bundy was attractive. I've seen the pictures. I didn't think so, but I guess
then he was.
Yeah, I guess back then in the time he was. Yeah.
A dapper dude.
Yeah, a dapper dude. However, Diedrich or Chuck.
Chucky.
Oh, ew. Gross. He wasn't necessarily attractive for the time. He had a droopy eye. He kind of wore like grungy overalls all the time. He's a little bit of a bigger boy, and he was a bit older. But he did have the gift of gabs, and looks only get you so far anyway. When you can charm somebody, you can get anywhere. And again, Bundy proved that. Diedrich was intelligent and sophisticated in his search for meaning. He often referred to Ralph Waldo Emerson and to W. Edwards Deming. To Buckminster Fuller and to current visionaries and brightest intellectuals. Many residents of Synanon were highly educated and intellectually curious. Diedrich always wanted to have fun and have his intellect challenged. He wanted to be engaged in life. He watched everything and responded. He made Synanon a rich and fun place to live, and he wanted everyone to have that lifestyle. He personally would play the game with game department heads or supervisors. Those are the ones we talked about, the big game,
Yep.
who let their employees live in awkward or difficult situations. He wanted things to run smoothly and have all the people taken care of. He surrounded himself with type A personalities. He liked the flash of strong emotions. Diedrich often dared members to challenge him, but he surrounded himself with people who were delighted to take him on. He liked the flash of strong emotions. Diedrich often dared members to challenge him, but he surrounded himself with people who were delighted to take him on. He had an underlying arrogance that had him unfearful of being actually challenged. David Gerstle, a former member, explained, he was a fabulous person. He was brilliant and conversationalist. He was one of the funniest people I've ever heard in my life. People adored him. That's the only way for it. Diedrich promised and even showed a euphoric lifestyle. Gerstle continued, the Synanon I joined was beautiful. They had beautiful properties in Marin County. They had lots of good-looking girls, and I was looking for a place to land. It was very exciting. We were going to create a new American institution, and we'd be the leaders. There was a vision that we could create a new world. It was a utopian. I wanted to try a commune. People were cheerful and happy and extremely loving. Everything was in perfect repair. It was like a Shaker community might have been, I guess. It's the background of what we were seeing on television, the mass slaughters in Vietnam and the assassination. This all looked pretty good.
It's
American
interesting because it starts out one way, right? But the kids that are born into it have a different experience in the end, don't they?
Yeah.
Because they're not chosen. They're not choosing to be there. They were like born into it, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Different generations coming out of there too, you know?
Yeah, because they've been around forever. So I'm like, I'm thinking of the kids growing up in this.
So I got to read a bit about the aspect of the kids that were brought into it, those punk squad teenagers, and how they rebelled against it because they didn't agree to it. That's not how they grew up. That's not how they lived, and they felt it was wrong. But I didn't get to read any aspects of the kids that were born in it because that was probably normal for them, and they probably didn't know any different.
No,
But I
there's no
didn't
way.
Yeah, I couldn't find anything on those children, and that's totally fine because
I don't know why my mind went there. It just did. I was just thinking like when you're born into something, that's your normal.
Yeah, no, that would make sense because just my psychology background, I was intrigued by that as well. But if those kids were kept out of the limelight and protected from all that, that's great for them,
Definitely.
Yeah. But I was kind of intrigued by that as well to see what they went through and how they grew from that. Oh, the American Psychological Association explains that antisocial personality disorder is characterized by a persistent disregard for social norms and the rights of others, with a lack of empathy, often leading to manipulative and exploitative behaviors. Key traits include deceitfulness, lack of guilt, and a lack of remorse. These individuals may repeatedly break the law and lie. It sounds quite a bit like Diedrich.
Yes.
I watched a lot of videos where he just kind of was like nonchalant and didn't really care. He had a very nonchalant, flippant attitude when he talked about how he cared about his people, but you could hear how it was really just superficial. There was no real feeling behind his words when he talked about how he cared about his people. You can tell when you talk to somebody about how you care about something, like when Megan talks about her daughter, you can tell she really cares about her daughter. And when somebody's just talking about somebody they don't really care about. So, yeah. So with that being said, when using a powerful assessment tool such as the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, the MMPI, we know that one well, Megan.
Yes, we do.
The psychologists Ross and Wellish both found support for the notion that cult leaders tend to fake good, showing elevations on certain validity scales. Therefore, the lack of elevation on the MMPI clinical scales for cultists cannot be taken as proof of the absence of psychopathology. Do I need to explain that a little bit more?
Maybe.
Maybe for
Yeah.
maybe for your listeners, yes.
Okay. So, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory is, what is it, Megan? Like 650 multiple choice questions. It's long. It takes hours to do. I've done it. And it explains your personality type, but has certain things built into it that if you are trying to fake the test in a way to hide, so let's say I'm a really big liar and I'm taking this test and I'm trying really hard to cover up the fact that I'm a big liar, this test is going to bring up certain flags saying that, oh, she's trying really hard to cover up that she lies. And that's where this fake good shows up. This cultist is trying really hard to make themselves seem like they're a good person. So a fake good flag is going to come up.
I have a question, and I think you'll be able to answer it, and I think you'll know what I'm asking. But
Okay.
anyway, you had mentioned that they would recruit type A personalities. Unless I'm making that up. Am I right?
Yeah.
They recruited type A's, right? Okay.
Mhm.
Does that come out in any of this? Is that kind of like their mentality too is type A? And what is type A
Type A
personality?
type personalities are typically they're us, Megan. They're
That's
the
what I'm
very
getting at, Mandy.
Yeah. My internet is unstable again, just like me. So the you can leave that in if you want.
Yeah, I
Might
think I
as well.
will.
It's type A personality right
Yeah.
there.
Yep. The type A personality is the bubbly, loud, outgoing, kind of boisterous, goofy, fun personality.
Oh, that's not
Um,
me.
yeah, it's me and Megan. We're loud as hell. You know where we are at all points in time. Cracking jokes, saying dumb stuff. Yeah. But just because you have a type A personality doesn't mean that you are on the antisocial spectrum. But typically, people who are on the antisocial spectrum are a type A person because to be manipulative and charming and cunning and suave and all of that, you have to be that outgoing personality.
A lot of your police officers are type A personality.
Yes.
That's what my study was in. So there's a lot of type A going on in leadership roles, let's say, whether that's you're leading a cult, a gang in prison, or a squad.
I want to
You know what
know
I
what
mean?
I am. How do I find out what type of personality I am?
So there's you can look up, they have the do they it's the big three now, isn't it? They're not on the big five anymore. It's big three personalities.
I'm not sure. I know of a
Oh,
few personality tests. I've recently taken the Enneagram,
oh yeah, okay. No, it's
the Briggs.
yeah.
Yeah.
What
There's
if
that
I
one.
have multiple personalities? Just kidding.
They'll come
Well,
out.
What about if I'm all of the
multiple
personalities?
personality isn't a thing anymore. It's called dissociative identity disorder. So
Well,
she's
that would
like,
be
well,
fun.
she's like, you just shot me in the foot there.
Dead.
I could go on this tangent
So
all
these are the
day.
people that they recruit or the people that create the cults?
The people who are the leaders and the creators of the cult are typically the type A personalities that fall onto the antisocial personality spectrum. But at least for Diedrich in his cult, he liked recruiting the type A personalities because that's the people he liked around him.
Type A's usually gravitate towards type A's.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
They tend to find other people who are not type A's kind of boring.
Mm-hmm.
And boring and lame. Not exciting, not fun. Not that there's anything wrong with
I
them.
changed my
It's
mind.
just-
I'm type A. I'm type A. I'm just kidding. I don't know.
But as Megan was and and in law enforcement and stuff, you'll see a lot of that type A personality. But also another thing, which I'm sure Megan already knows, is that in law enforcement and there's really high-end leadership like CEOs and stuff like that, there's also a lot of antisocial personality traits too and psychopathy.
Yes, there is. You
So
should read my book.
I sh
But seriously, I mean, it's a good thing to point out that, we have these people researching this at the same time that, the people researching it actually have some of this as well. So just throwing that out there.
yeah. I'm a type A personality, which type A personality people typically have higher higher stress and anger. And my study is going to be on problematic anger. So yeah,
I'm excited for you.
I'm not
I'm really
excited.
excited. I'm excited when you're actually a candidate, when you have the C, the little C on the end of your PhD C, and then that drops up. I'm so excited for you. I'm so proud of you, Mandy.
Oh my gosh, I'm not excited. I'm tired, boss.
I understand. It's a process. It's a process.
Okay, back to the validity scales. So yeah, the MMPI is really good at picking up when you're trying to fake or lie on the test. I remember one of the questions being like, if you're stuck in line behind somebody that's moving really slow, do you get angry? And I was like, yeah, I can't stand slow walkers. You just get the F out of my way.
I'll even say something.
Dude, I imagine like Spartan kicking them. That like I'm that bad a person. And that's something I would lie about on the MMPI because that makes me an awful person. The MMPI, she's lying. She's faking like she's a good person.
I love everybody.
So what happens if you answer truthfully? What does that
If you
make
answer
you?
truthfully, it's your validity scale is going to be it's going to be more accurate. It's going to say, yeah, she's being truthful. This is more than likely going to be her actual personality.
So like the
But
words asshole at the end of the personality test will flash. Like,
yeah,
you're just an
they're like
asshole.
this test came back that she is very strongly an asshole. Or it's going to come back like she's like we think she lied a lot about being an asshole, so she's more than likely an asshole and not this good person that she claims she is.
I need to
Really
do
what
this test.
man,
Or
those
you
were
can
some
go,
really good analogies.
or you can get interviewed by the Secret Service for 7 hours. It's the same darn
No.
thing.
Yeah,
No.
exactly.
Mhm.
I had to do the MMPI and then what is the other one? It's the California multiphasic personality, the CMPI, is that what it is? The
I don't know that.
CCPI.
Do I know that one? I don't know that I know.
They're basically the same thing. I had to do both of them and it took like 6 hours and I hated my life.
I would like want to turn it into an interview with them. Like, how did you get into this field? Like, what made you want to do this? How did you get here?
Yeah.
That's what I would
At
want
that
to know.
at that point, I was just trying to see my way out. I was like CAB Christmas tree and all the way down. I was like, I just want to get out of here.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I didn't get hired. And that my mind came back that I was high on the aggressive scale. I don't know why they would have got that.
You chose too many C's.
Probably. Okay. All
I've
right.
also taken the DISC personality test. That's the leadership one.
Oh, I don't think I've taken that one
Take that when you have a second. They have them free on the interweb.
on
Take
the
one and
interwebs.
just see if it lies where you think it. Mine did. Mine definitely was spot on. So
Mine's probably gonna come back like chaotic, evil leader.
that's kind of what mine was.
Okay, yeah. Because we were talking about how I was an emergency vehicle instructor, and I was like, well, there's one part of the route that people get really hung up on, and I was like, I promise you, if you just floor it and you let Jesus take the wheel, that is when you're gonna do the best. And they're like, don't tell people that. And I was like, that's literally how you have to do it. Like floor it and Jesus take the wheel. You can't tell people that as an instructor.
Imagine if I told my firearms students that. Just close your eyes and let Jesus
Wish
take
for the
trigger.
best.
Yeah.
Just just put it on full auto, honey. Close your eyes, just squeeze as fast as you can.
You'll hit
It'll be
something.
fine. Hey, I tell everybody all the time, like, if we get into a firefight, y'all better duck because I'm praying and spraying because everybody knows I can't shoot for shit. 8 years in the military, y'all better duck because I'm praying and spraying.
That's great.
Yeah, so the MMPI, where was I? Therefore, the lack of elevation on the MMPI clinical scales for the cult leaders can't be taken as proof of the absence of psychopathology, meaning it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not on the antisocial personality scale. So for Ross and Wellish themselves, they noted it's likely that the scales would have been elevated had they not consciously skewed their responses. As we were just talking about, had they not tried to lie, it would have came out elevated, saying that they were on the scale.
That
Okay.
other test, by the way, MMPI, and then there's the CPI, the California Psychological Inventory Personality Test.
Yes, that's the
Is
one
the
I was
other
talking
one.
about.
Yep.
Yeah, the CPI is a little bit shorter, but it's still excruciating. Like, I would rather sit down in an interview than do that again.
Imagine
Yeah.
these cult leaders if they actually use these skills for something good, like what they could accomplish.
Oh, they absolutely could. I mean,
They could do so much.
yeah.
Oh my God, yeah, because like for me, going through so many years of like psychology and forensic psychology, I've learned so much about, you know, my master's was in behavior analysis. I can look at people and, for the most part, know how they're feeling and what they're thinking just by what they're doing with their hands and their body and stuff like that. And I can tailor the questions that I'm saying to them and the tone that I'm talking to them and the way that I'm moving my body to make them more comfortable.
It'd be great in interrogations.
Yes. My office, when I first got here to Cuba, my office looked like a jail cell and I decorated it really nicely. It smells nice in there. It looks comfortable. I've got a nice couch with pillows on it. I've got pretty plants and I'm like, the room is more comfortable. It's going to make people want it. It's going to make them feel more comfortable and they're going to be more relaxed and they're going to be more likely to talk to me. It's things like that I learned in psychology that can be helpful, and not just for me getting information out of the bad guys, but I mean, talking to victims too.
Right.
If I can tell a victim is uncomfortable or scared or nervous, I can use my body language and my tone and the way I'm asking questions to make them more comfortable.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So if all of these cult leaders, if, Diedrich, who raised a multi-million-dollar organization, had actually created a revolutionary drug rehabilitation program, that would have been amazing. But no, of course, he had to be an asshole.
Yeah.
Rule number 1, don't be an asshole.
Right?
The first thing everyone says is why? Why would people let this happen to them? Why didn't they leave? Why did they follow him? Just like they always say with victims of abuse, it's the same thing. Like, why would they ever do that? Why would somebody stay in that? Why would they allow that to happen? Psychologists and sociologists have been studying cults for years and have given some very good explanations that help make it more understandable. Psychologist Richard Offshee examined the evolution of Synanon from its inception in 1958 as a drug rehabilitation program into a cult-like organization. Offshee analyzed the managerial strategies employed by Synanon's leadership, particularly Diedrich, to transform the organization's structure and control mechanisms. The study highlights how Synanon's leadership manipulated social dynamics and organizational policies to consolidate power, leading to increased authoritarianism and the suppression of dissent within the group. Offshee's work provided insight into the processes by which therapeutic communities can evolve into coercive cults through deliberate managerial strategies. So first, the initial leadership, Diedrich held symbolic leadership, but there was a sense of collective governance. So he made people feel like they were all a part of it. Even though he was kind of the leader, they all had a say. They were all in it together. They were all working together to build this. He gradually increased his control over the organization, employing deliberate managerial strategies to transform Synanon's internal structure. Rules became increasingly strict, dictating members' behaviors, dress, relationship, and even speech. No longer a temporary program, Synanon began requiring permanent residency and full submission to the community. Those who questioned leadership were expelled or publicly humiliated during the game. External contact was restricted to eliminate outside influence and foster dependency. And then by the late 60s, Synanon had fully transitioned to a high-demand totalistic group, what Offsheet categorized as a cult. Several major transformations characterized this period. It was the ideological indoctrination, where members were expected to accept Synanon's worldview uncritically, including beliefs in permanent addiction, social reconstruction, and Diedrich's prophetic authority.
So it wasn't until the 70s that really it was a cult.
Yeah, it wasn't until about the late 60s, 70s. 'Cause it seems like this all evolved really, really quickly the way I'm reading it, but it did
didn't.
move very slowly. Yeah.
That makes more sense as to why people would gradually, you know what I mean? They no red flags were flying at the onset, and it was more of a wait a minute, did we just take things too far type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So surveillance and compliance, constant monitoring, loyalty test, and public shaming ensured obedience, and structural isolation. Synonyms slowly became a closed system socially, physically, and psychologically. Members lived, worked, and socialized exclusively within the community. Elimination of personal autonomy. Marriages were broken up and reassigned. Children were raised communally, and reproductive decisions such as the vasectomies and the abortions were mandated by leadership. As power solidified, began using to maintain control both internally and externally. And members carried weapons, and Synanon created a culture of fear to enforce the conformity. Then the retaliation against critics with the rattlesnake and everything induced more fear. And sociologically, Synanon is a case study in how charismatic leadership, when left unchecked, can weaponize therapeutic tools. So clinically, it's a cautionary tale about how group therapy models and the fine line between confrontation and abuse. Legally and ethically, it serves as a precedent for regulation of private treatment organizations and religious movements. As we talked about a little while ago, Megan, this, even though with me reading it over this past hour and a half, seems like this all moved really, really, really fast, but we're talking about a 20-year span. So all of these steps that I talked about were done in very, very small. If you ask somebody to do something small, you're going to be like, okay, sure. And if you keep asking them to do small things that slowly escalate, you're not going to realize a big difference.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh, wow, how the hell did I get here?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, oh, crap. You don't realize how small the box you're in is until you're inside the box.
Makes sense.
Yes.
And then, like we had just talked about, it was the perfect case study and how he weaponized therapeutic tools. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So the heart of the Synanon experience was the participation in what we talked about was the game and the structured verbal combat. They'd spend anywhere from 20 to 100 hours a month gathered in the circle with a dozen to 15 people and talk to each other. And a former member explained the key notes of the game was savage, angry, verbal attacks on each other, ridicule, destructive attacks with no holds barred. Gerstel explained he remembered one woman who had learned that she was dying of cancer. I'm sorry, again, trigger warning. Gerstel explained he remembered one woman who had learned that she was dying of cancer. She was savagely belittled at one session. When it was over, another member of the group turned to her and said, "You don't even deserve to have cancer." Yeah, that's awful.
Wow.
Under Diedrich's direction, Synanon supporters say these encountered sessions helped many heroin users get rid of their addiction. and the organization provided enough satisfaction to non-addicts to make them a principal factor in the explosive group of Synanon in the 1970s. Although many of the new members appeared to like playing the game, former members said they realized after a while that they were losing their self-confidence, becoming increasingly dependent upon the Synanon community for support and less likely to want to return to the outside world. Again, as we discussed in episode 1, the National Alliance of Mental Illness also calls this form of treatment psychological abuse, and when coupled with love bombing post facto, it's a form of manipulation and is commonly used to make a partner subservient and remain in the cycle of abuse. So listeners may also think, well, those people who joined, those members and those that stuck by it, must have been weak or simple-minded people who were easy to manipulate. Well, a study by J. Thomas Ungerleider, I hope I said that right again, and David Wellish, Coercive Persuasion or Brainwashing, Religious Cults and Deprogramming, examined the psychological and psychosocial characteristics of 50 individuals affiliated with religious cults. No evidence of mental illness was found in any group. IQ levels were normal across all participants, and members and ex-members were psychologically intact and legally competent. Their motivations for joining and leaving cults varied significantly, and cults provided a structured environment fulfilling emotional needs for some at that point in time. So, most importantly, what we're gathering from this is Diederik preyed on a very vulnerable population. So remember, all of his initial members or recruits, I guess, were drug addicts. For drug addicts, shame, failure, vulnerability, guilt, feelings of unworthiness, and inadequacy are intricate emotional states deeply intertwined with recovery from addiction. Research in psychology and neuroscience on the profound impact of these emotions on those in active use or recently recovered often feel the state of feeling exposed to or susceptible to harm, which can play significant roles in the development and perpetration of addictive behaviors. Dr. Brené Brown identified shame as the most powerful contributor to addiction, often serving as a driving force behind substance abuse as individuals seek to numb or escape painful feelings of self-loathing or unworthiness. Furthermore, vulnerability, when left unaddressed, can exacerbate feelings of isolation and hopelessness. Many individuals more susceptible to addictive patterns as they seek comfort or relief.
I was going to say and I'm not a psychologist by any means, but safety seems like, you have to have that feeling of safety, that feeling of connectedness, that feeling of, I am safe in my person as I am type of thing. I mean, I could definitely see why these people got sucked in, if you will.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I dig a little bit more into that, but as I'm talking about this, I want to give a big shout out to my baddies in recovery out there. I got a couple friends in recovery and I watch them all the time, and I'm so freaking proud of them. They know who they are. They know I love them. I don't want to call them out by name, but super proud of them. So with that being said, those living with addiction have likely been treated with harsh judgment, rejection, and isolation by their community of friends and family. And I'm going to be completely honest with everyone. Megan, when I was in school with you, I was doing a lot of addictions counseling classes, and I was working at the jail. So before I started my bachelor's in 2010 and working as a corrections officer, I talked to a lot of the inmates that I had worked with. They were still humans who lived a very different life, so I learned a lot by talking to them. Before talking to most of them, you were actually in there for some sort of drug crime. It was Cincinnati. At the time, there was a lot of heroin issues there. I always blamed the addict. I was like, why would you even do that in the first place? It's stupid, right? If you're going to do drugs, you get what you deserve. But now I'm more educated and I know better. And one of the things that kind of forget, I can't remember his name, but I remember what she looks like and I remember the word. To this day, I'll remember the inmate, what she told me exactly. She said, she looked at me and she was like, Officer Huff, do you think I want to be like this? And she put her arms over the counter to me and she showed me these awful like track marks and scars and holes all over her arm. And she showed me the side of her neck. And she's both sides of her neck. And she's like, I will show you the rest of my body. It looks just the same. She's like, do you think I knew this was going to happen to me? Do you think I wanted to end up being a nasty ass junkie? I just wanted to be a normal person like you. And she continued to explain that how she got addicted to heroin when she was 14 years old. Yeah. How can you blame a child?
Right. I have a lot of friends that got, I shouldn't say a lot. I have a handful of friends that got addicted to pain pills that eventually led to heroin use.
Yeah.
And one of my best friend, like I've known him since I was born. Like we're a year apart from each other, but basically brought up like brother and sister. And well, I was over at his house one night and I said to him, I said, "Look, can I show you something?" And he said, "Yeah." And I showed him a clip that I used to show in substance abuse class. So in substance abuse, I would teach you all, I would go from sugar to tobacco and then go all the way to heroin. And the neurons just light up like trees. They're all over the place for the addiction. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And I said, "Can I show you this video?" And it's actually the scientific video of how your neurons fire and everything and how it works. And he said to me, and I will never ever forget this, he said, "If I would have watched this prior to using for my first time, I would have never have used."
Yeah, you know what? Now that you said that, I remember that because I used that for my presentation at the halfway house I was working.
Yep. And remember
And
how I would say to all of you guys, like, okay, next time you meet an addict, I want you to think, how many of you have smoked cigarettes? And most of the majority of the class would raise
I
their hand.
smoked at the time. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I quit
And I said, and
smoking.
how many times have you guys, has anybody in here successfully quit? And I think maybe one or two people raised their hands.
Yeah, I
And I
was
said, all
quitting
right.
smoking at that time.
Yeah. And I said, so next time you think of that, think of all the neurons that are firing up in your brain that are much more than tobacco use, your tobacco addiction.
Yeah.
And what is it, 30 times more? Don't quote me on that. I know it's, significantly more. It's been a long time since I taught that class.
Oh gosh, I don't know. Luckily, luckily since then, I am a lot more educated on
Hmm.
addiction and how it works and everything. And like, they are still humans. And like she said, do you really think a junkie wants to be a junkie? If they saw themselves as a junkie, do you think they would be happy with themselves? They would be proud of themselves? No. Nobody ever thinks they're going to end up that way. And I've studied a lot more of genetics and epigenetics and all of that stuff. And I have learned that I have the genetics and the propensity to be a profound addict. I just, I'm not necessarily going to say lucky, but I have been very with my life and knew that I had those propensities. And I've worked very hard to not do that. I caught myself young drinking way too much and I knew that I was going down a wrong road. Some other people aren't nearly as lucky as me. I
And
could
that
have been
has
that person.
absolutely, that also has to do with type A too, because we're more daredevilish. We're more apt to try new things, if you will.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I literally just the other day, we were at the beach. I looked at a cliff. I was like, man, I wish I wasn't afraid of heights and I wish I could swim. I want to jump off that cliff right now. Who says that? I can't swim and I don't like heights, but I want to jump off that cliff. Yeah. So, continue on. Yeah. She literally like, how long? That was like in 2010. It's like 15 years ago, I guess. Like she literally opened my eyes. Yeah. So for one, you can't blame the child, especially when her mother gave it to her. Her mother
It's
got her
awful.
addicted. Yeah. Um, she told me how she had stolen so much money and so much stuff for her grandma. Her grandma for who she adored so much and she hated herself. And how everyone hated her as well. Her whole family hated her. They had written her off. She hadn't spoke to any of them. She was living on the street. She was actually happy that she had been arrested and that she was doing some time. She told me, she was like, I'm in here. I get food. I have a safe place to sleep. She's like, I'm clean while I'm in here. She's like, I don't have to worry about, whether I am going to be sexually assaulted sleeping under the bridge, whether somebody's going to rob me or they're going to kill me, or I might overdose and somebody's not going to find me. She said, um, she felt that she was so worthless that she didn't even have the will to kill herself, even though she wanted to.
That's
Yeah.
rough.
Yeah. It took everything I had to not literally just cry right there in front of her. These are the people that Diedrich preyed on. Almost 10,000 of them, just like that girl. Yeah. I can't, I come up with some very, very colorful names for people, but I can't even come up with one for him. That is a wet being. Like I can't even fathom it. Those people were at rock bottom.
Yeah.
They were desperate and begging for help, and they were looking for people like them who understood them, who would support them and help them and love them regardless.
They wanted a community.
Yeah, they want a safe, happy, comfortable home, like Megan said, to finally have that beautiful utopian life they dreamed of and that Diedrich waved in their face.
Awful.
Yep. For sure.
Yeah, gross. Dr. Stephen Ash explains this conversion process of members as more effective when prior personality factors and environmental factors render the individual recruit especially susceptible to the cult's manipulative techniques. In short, extremist cult conversion is usually an interplay of personal vulnerability factors and cult physical and social and environmental factors. Basically what I just explained.
Yep.
These started to go bad, they had nowhere to go. They too became a victim of violence, any other victim of violence. They were not less of a victim just because they were addicts. According to Dr. Brian Brown, embracing vulnerability can be transformative, serving as a catalyst for growth, healing, and connection in addiction recovery. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, can be effective in helping individuals identify and reframe negative thought patterns. However, Diedrich used these key tenets of therapy modalities, such as dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, and acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, to keep them more vulnerable and reliant on him and his community. Diedrich's leaders and his cohorts continue to do the same, even after Diedrich is dead, even after Synanon closed its doors and was disbanded. These practices continued on in other quotey fingers, quote unquote, groups until 2005.
Wow.
Yeah.
A long time.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. And some people wonder why, separation of church and state is so good, but sometimes separation of church and state is not.
Correct.
Yeah. We need checks and balances. We sometimes, I hate to admit it, but we do need to have eyes in there because this went on for 20 years because they were protected as a religion. I couldn't get a number on how many teenagers and children were affected by this. How many were born into this? I don't even know.
That was interesting. I can't believe I knew nothing
Yeah.
about this.
I didn't either.
Like,
My brother
wow.
brought it up and I started reading it and I was like, man, I could have did so much more. And I go, man, I could have kept going.
Well, it's been around forever, so I bet the information out there is endless.
Yeah. There's HBO, there's a lot of documentaries on it, and I didn't even get to watch the documentaries. I didn't have time.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So, if anybody listening wants to know more, HBO.
Hey, if anybody wants to know more and wants me to dig in some more, I will dig in some more.
Yeah.
Because I definitely could have went way further into the psychology
I mean,
too.
you could. You could even focus on the kids that were born into it, what happened with them,
Yeah.
stuff like that. I mean,
Yeah,
you could have went in any direction. I think that was interesting.
Yeah. I thought it was too. Like it made me really, really sad at some points. And it made me really, really angry because the last portion we talked about, where he took these treatment modalities that are used to build up people and he reverse engineered them to control these people. And I was like,
Yeah.
that's disgusting.
I'm going to start a cult for something good.
I was, you had a long pause in that.
I know,
I'm
right?
going to start a cult, and I was just like, my camera is off, so you didn't see my head snap over. But I was like, is that what you got out of this, Nyoka? Really?
Well, I was thinking, and when you said that, I was thinking, should I join it or not?
Well, you know, me and my type A personality, she's like, we should start a cult. And I was like, hell yeah.
I have a shirt that says, let's start a cult. I love it.
Well, now
Oh.
in our zoning laws, we have cottage courts, which is set up just like a commune. So that would be perfect. Like
Hmm.
we could do this. There are places in this county that, are suitable for a cottage court that have
Okay.
it permitted use,
All right, let's start planning.
So I just talked for 2 hours about the negatives of a cult, and here we are. Let's start a cult.
I just
Just
want a
hot girl
garden,
shit,
dude.
you know.
I just want a
We
garden.
can have a garden without a cult.
On a real note, thank you for doing this. Like, this
Yes,
was
thank
so
you.
awesome. Like,
Oh,
the first. All right, so that will do it for this episode. Thanks again, Mandy, for coming on and covering a cult that I love to hear about cults, and you know that, so thank you. And if you guys want to hear any bonus episodes, you know to go to the show notes where we have a Patreon link, and we got some really good stuff up there right now if you want to check that out. Otherwise, you could just find us on social media if you would share our post or support us in any way like that. That would be great too. And until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.
bye.
Da-da-da-da-da.